Nearly 25 years ago, I was living at my parents' old two-story house in the middle of farmland in Florida. They had both moved to a bigger city and were still trying to sell the old farmhouse. I was about 20 and too old to move with my parents to their new place, so they let me stay at the house by myself until they sold it. This allowed me to finish college and save the money I made at my PT job. It was about my third month being there alone. It was about 11:30 p.m. I was reading in my bed upstairs and I heard a loud banging on the door. I walked out of the room and looked over the balcony at the front door, and I saw someone staring up at me through one of the side stained glass panes. It was a man in his 30s. I've never felt such a surge of panic. I called my uncle and it rang and rang. I grabbed the .357 Magnum that my dad had left for me and told me a billion times to keep close to me at all times, and I called 911. Once the dispatch operator was on the phone with me, the guy was kicking at the door, one loud kick every 10 seconds. The 911 dispatcher told me someone would be there in less than 5 minutes and advised me to tell her which room I was in. I was terrified and I could hear the doors starting to crack. I put the phone down and cocked the .357 Magnum and stayed at the top of the stairs. He kept kicking, and as the door was about to give way, he looked through the stained glass window again, right at me. I pointed the gun at him, and he made this expression that I can only describe as excitement. He kicked, and the door gave way and slammed open and broke the window pane. He ran up the stairs, and as he took the first 2 steps, I stood up and shot him right in the stomach. He yelled and fell back and hit the foyer floor and started moaning non-stop, writhing. I stood like a statue with the gun pointed at him until the cops arrived. And when the first officer entered the front door, I pointed the gun at him and he screamed at me to drop it. For some reason, I lowered the gun but couldn't let go of it. He said that everything was gonna be okay, but I had to let go of the gun. A few minutes later, an ambulance pulled up, and for some reason, it wasn't until I saw paramedics that I put the gun down and started crying. The man died en route to the ER that night. The officers told me he had a rap sheet a mile long. He also had a .45 in his glove compartment. They took me to the police station, and my parents drove back that night and took me to their new home. The house sold a month later, and I never stayed there alone again. My uncle was gone for the night to visit his other farmlands in Okeechobee. I don't really think about this event anymore. It takes a specific inquiry for me to remember it. I now have a concealed carry .38 special that I always keep in my purse, and I would never give that up. So this occurred many years ago, but it will forever stay with me and change my views on allowing my kids to ever have their own separate phone line. It was a few weeks after Christmas. My parents had gotten me my own personal phone with my own separate phone line, because that was the cool thing back then, before the cell phone was big. And I'd given my friends the number because who wouldn't, right? Anyway, it was about 3 a.m. and I had been sleeping when my phone begins to ring. I thought, that's odd. Who can be calling this early? We all have to be up for school in the morning. So I answered it, but all that could be heard was breathing on the other end. I laughed it off as someone just messing with me and hung up. I tried returning to sleep, but my phone rang again. And this time I answered it and said, "Who is this?" Nothing, just breathing again. At this point, I was beginning to get irritated. I told him to stop calling me and hung up. I lay down again for about 30 minutes when my phone rang for yet the 3rd time that morning. I was mad, so I answered and said, "This isn't funny, I'm trying to sleep. I have school in the morning, stop calling me." This time, there was a reply. It was a man's voice. It sounded very gravelly, and he laughed and said,
"I can see you. You're very pretty. Why don't you come out and play in the snow with me?"
And with that, I hung up and started crying. I ran to my parents' room and woke up my mom, telling her what happened. She woke my dad up and made me tell him what had happened. So they both get up, and my dad goes into my room and checks the windows and everything, makes sure all the locks are on and all the doors are locked, and proceeds to tell me it's just someone playing a sick joke and that everything will be fine. And then he told me to just unplug my phone from the outlet. So I finally go back to sleep until my mom wakes me up for school. I get up and start getting ready, open my blinds to the window that leads to the backyard, and noticed on this very frosty morning that there were handprints all over my window. I called my parents in there, totally freaked out. My dad immediately calls the police. The police come out to take a report and look at the evidence. They decided they want to go to the backyard. And sure enough, there were a set of footprints in the snow that led right up to my window. They had gone from the front of the house to the back to my window, and back to the back door and back to the front door. And the police think the guy had tried to get into the house.
Stranger Stories. This story happened years ago, but that doesn't stop me from thinking about it every now and then. I was about 13 or 14 and was babysitting 2 boys for some church members. I had done it before, the kids loved me, and the parents were very comfortable with me. This was a night where they were going to be gone until about 2:30 in the morning. I was doing it for free that day because they were going to do something church-related, and that's just how I rolled. Anyway, the place they lived in was an apartment complex. You know, one of those small ones that had 2 floors. They were on the bottom floor. It was around 1:30 a.m., and I knew they would be getting home soon. The kids were already knocked out. I grabbed a couple of DVDs to watch to make the night go quicker. I was already very tired and had drifted in and out of sleep a couple of times already. All of a sudden, I hear knocking on the front door. Knowing the parents had a key, I did nothing but sit there in the dark with the TV glowing. Being a paranoid person who's seen enough horror movies, I grabbed the baseball bat that was next to the couch. What happened next will haunt me forever. I heard a low voice, almost like a young woman's whisper.
"Oh dear, that won't help you."
My heart stopped. I realized the patio door didn't have the blinds shut. My eyes shift slowly to the door, and I see someone on the patio staring right at me. I couldn't make out anything other than that they were very short and wide. I screamed and ran into the kids' room. Thankfully, they were still asleep. This was before I had a cell phone, and there were no cordless phones in the house. All I did was push the dresser in front of the door and stared at the one window of the room, hoping not to see anything through it. A shadow loomed on the window. The knocking started again, and the woman's voice called out,
"Come on, dear, I won't hurt you. Please, come out."
The window was being knocked on so hard I was afraid it would break. The kids woke up screaming and horrified by the loud knocking. Knowing I had 2 young, terrified kids with me, I became vulnerable and afraid. Within 2 seconds, I hear the father yell out,
"Hey, who the hell are you?"
and the person running away. The front door opened and there was a harsh knocking on the kids' bedroom door. Thankfully, it was the parents. I let them in and put the dresser back. I explained what happened, and they called the police. When they arrived, they found nothing but the bushes that hide the patio, cut up and ripped, possibly for whomever it was to get through. The family moved away about 5 months later, and I never babysat anyone ever again. I know the woman was long gone, but to this day, every time I hear a knock, a chill runs through me.
I was 12 and out trick-or-treating with my best friend who was also 12. Back in those days, it was not unusual for older children, including females, to be unescorted by adults. We lived in an older area, now a suburb of a major city, suitably dressed in costumes and, as usual, running along excited. We were several blocks away from either of our homes. We didn't know anyone on this particular block, but the houses were mostly well lit with front porch lights, and many had carved pumpkins on the steps or near the door, one of the main signs that the household was giving out candy. I remember where this particular house was, on 4th Street, about midway on the south side of the block. In this area were some houses of the kind built by earlier settlers before city codes, often somewhat odd, with different parts added later on. Anyway, we get to this one house, and it has a walkway to the right of the house. This leads to a few steps up to a door, but the door is wide open. My friend and I pause on the steps, a bit uncertain. Of course, we had been warned not to go inside any houses, but this is what, an extra long porch? We see a long empty hallway that appears to be built along the side of the house. It's odd, but the hallway, or porch if it was, is very well lit, and at the end of it was another door, beside which are 2 carved pumpkins. This is obviously the trick-or-treat door, so after a brief hesitation, we forged ahead. We knocked on this second door, and a woman, maybe in her 30s, ordinary looking and not too friendly, opened it, gave us some candy, and then shut the door. We had turned around and were halfway back down the long hallway, when suddenly, out stepped a man who had been hiding behind the open first door. He shut the door and stood in the front of the closed door, blocking our exit. My friend and I froze in our tracks. The man, probably also in his 30s, medium-sized and average-looking, stood for a few seconds not saying anything, but seeming to enjoy the effect he was having, namely having scared us speechless. Well, it was Halloween. A scare and then a laugh maybe might be okay, even expected. Perhaps from someone's goofy dad or uncle pranking it up. There are lots of haunted house setups after all. But this guy just stood there, blocking the door and not saying anything, and staring at us with a smug, creepy smile. Finally he said,
Don't you know you're not supposed to walk into strangers' houses?
But he still didn't move away from the door. We continued to stand there, frozen, not saying anything. After some more freaky silence, he said,
So, what are you gonna do now?
I knew the way he was looking at us was more than a scary prank. It was creepy and weird. I don't know what my friend was thinking, but I was thinking if he doesn't open that door very soon, I'm gonna run back and pound really hard on the second door until that woman answers it. This happened maybe for only a couple of minutes, the creeper gloating and leering at us while blocking the door, but it seemed much longer. Finally he stepped over, grabbed the handle, and disappeared behind the back of the now open door. We bolted out of there like a pair of jackrabbits. My friend and I looked at each other as we ran away, but we continued on our trick-or-treat mission down the street. We never discussed how weird he was later, and we never told our parents.